Today we're going to look at how to write intervals of increase, decrease, positive, and negative for various graphs. So let's first talk about some vocabulary. You've heard the word increase, decrease, positive, and negative before. Those are words you're very familiar with, but students tend to get these two confused. So this tends to be the most difficult for students until it clicks. And then once it clicks, it's not too bad. So an interval of increase is where your graph is going up from left to right. And it could be doing that on one interval, it could be doing that on multiple intervals, or it may never go up. It just depends on the graph. Decrease is the opposite of that. The graph is going down from left to right. Positive and negative are not the same thing. Positive is where your graph is above the x-axis, and negative is where your graph is below the x-axis. So you can be going up or increasing, but be below the x-axis and being negative. And a lot of students get that confused. So we're going to do 6 examples today to hopefully clear any confusion up. Most important thing, and this is where students often mess up, and I'm going to give you some pointers on this, is since you are looking left to right, you will only use x coordinates when writing your intervals. You will not use y coordinates, and you are going to want to. Everything is going to make you want to use a y, but you have to remember to use x. So let's look at this first example. So I'm going to go ahead and have you do several things. Like what we did the other day, I want you to add arrows. Here's what's different. On the left arrow, I want you to label that negative infinity because that's where it's going. It's going left. Don't worry about it going up. Remember, we're only using x. And on the right side, since it's going right, it's going to positive infinity. Not down, it's going to the right. The other thing I want you to add to your graph are any x-intercepts, which we have one at 4, 0, and that's our only one. And then I want you to cross off the y-coordinate because, again, we are only using x's. And if you were to have any maximum or minimum values, you would add that to your graph as well. On here, we don't. So let's start going through these intervals. So I'm going to go through the definition every single time. Increase means going up from left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the left side at that negative infinity, and I'm going to go to the right side. If I do that, I never go up. So that means there is no increase from negative infinity to positive infinity. There's no interval of increase at all. Consequently, that means it's always decreasing from negative infinity, because that's where we started, to positive infinity, because that's where we ended. Always start at negative infinity, make your way to positive infinity. The next thing I'm going to look at is positive and negative. Positive means above the x-axis, and negative means below the x-axis. So like the other one, I'm going to start at negative infinity, and I'm going to make my way to positive infinity. If I start at negative infinity, right now I am above the x-axis, and I will continue to be above the x-axis until I hit the x-axis at 4. So this graph is positive starting at negative infinity all the way into 4. Now if we keep going, now we're below the x-axis and we will continue to be below the x-axis until we hit infinity. So starting at 4 until infinity. Now a lot of students will say, well, why did you use a parenthesis on 4 instead of a bracket? At 4, the y-coordinate is 0. 0 is not positive and 0 is not negative, so it is not included in either of these intervals. All right, so let's try these intervals on an exponential function. Again, label your arrows. On the left side, negative infinity. On the right side, positive infinity. Any x-intercepts, we have one at 3, 0. cross off the 0 so you're not tempted to use it. There are no maximum or minimum values, so we're done labeling the graph. Increase means to go up from left to right, so let's start at negative infinity and make our way to positive infinity. If I do that, I will always go up. So it is increasing from negative infinity to positive infinity. Since it will never go down, we will write none on decrease. Linear and exponential functions will either increase or decrease. They do not do both. So now let's look at positive and negative. Positive means above the x-axis, negative means below the x-axis. From left to right. So start at negative infinity. Right now we are below the x-axis and we will stay below the x-axis until we hit the x-axis at 3. So this one starts at negative infinity and is below the x-axis until 3. Now if we keep going, it will be above the x-axis starting at 3 for the rest of the function, so until infinity. So it is positive from 3 to infinity. Now let's take a look at this quadratic function. So I'm going to add my left arrow, mark that negative infinity, add my right arrow, mark it positive infinity. I have two x-intercepts. I have 2, 0, cross off that 0. I have 6, 0, cross off that 0. And unlike the linear and exponential one that we already did, we have a maximum value. I'm going to label that 4, 4, cross off that y value so we're not tempted to use it. So the only things that we should be using in our intervals of increase, decrease, positive, or negative are negative infinity, 2, 4, 6, and positive infinity. So let's start with increase and decrease first. Increase means to go up, decrease means to go down, from left to right. So we're going to start at that negative infinity and we're going to make our way to positive infinity. Right now, we are going up and we will continue to go up until we hit that maximum at 4. So it is increasing from negative infinity to 4. Now if we keep going, we are going to start decreasing and we will continue to decrease all the way into infinity. So it's decreasing from 4 to infinity. For positive, that means above the x-axis. Negative means below the x-axis. From left to right, so we are going to start at negative infinity. So if we start at negative infinity, right now we are below the x-axis and we will stay below the x-axis until we hit the x-axis at 2. So it is negative from negative infinity to 2. If we keep going, now we are above the x-axis starting at 2 all the way until 6. So it's positive from 2 to 6. Be careful, don't stop at 4. 4 is still above, so you go all the way back until it hits the x-axis again. Unlike our other ones, if we keep going, we actually go back underneath the x-axis, so we go back below, which means we are negative again, starting at 6 until infinity. So we have another negative interval from 6 to infinity. Anytime you have multiple intervals for increase, decrease, positive, or negative, you're going to use this special symbol called the union. Kind of looks like a parabola opening up. It is not the letter U, although it looks similar to it. Now we're going to look back at that same cubic function that we did the other day. So I'm going to add my left arrow, mark it negative infinity, add my right arrow, mark it positive infinity. I have 3 x-intercepts, negative 6, 0, cross off that 0, negative 1, 0, cross off that 0, 4, 0, cross off that 0, and then we're going to add, it doesn't have necessarily a specific max or minimum value, but it does have what we call relative max and min values, which we're going to get into a little bit more tomorrow. If it has any peak or any valley, you want to label those as well. So we have one here at -4, 2. Cross off the 2. And then we have one here at 2, -2. Cross off that -2. So this one has a lot more twists and turns, so it has a lot more numbers that we're working with. So intervals of increase are where your graph is going up from left to right, and decrease where it's going down from left to right. Start at -infinity, make your way to positive infinity. So if I start at -infinity right now, I am going up, and I'm going to keep going up until I hit that peak at -4. So it is increasing from -infinity to -4. Now we're going to keep going. And now we are decreasing, starting at -4 all the way until we hit that valley at 2. So decreasing from -4 to 2. Got to get all the way to infinity, so I keep going. And now we are going back up, starting at 2 all the way until infinity. Remember to use that union symbol. Now let's take a look at positive, which means where it is above the x-axis, and negative, where it is below the x-axis from left to right. So let's start at -infinity. We are below the x-axis until we hit the x-axis at -6. So it is negative from -infinity to -6. Then we are above from -6, still above, until we hit that next x-intercept at -1. So it is above from -6 to -1. Then if we keep going, we go back below, starting at -1 all the way until the next x-intercept at 4. It's multiple intervals, so we want to make sure we use the union. Started at -1. all the way until 4. And then finally, if we keep going, starting at 4 for the rest of the curve until infinity, we will be above the x-axis. So from 4 to infinity, it is also positive. All right, this is another function we haven't looked at. This is our quartic function. We can still analyze it, even though it's not one of the types of functions you need to know how to solve or graph, but like always, I'm going to label my left arrow -infinity, right arrow positive infinity, x-intercept at -3, 0, cross off that 0, another x-intercept at 3, 0, and then I have a valley also at -3, 0. I have a peak at 0, 4. Make sure you cross off those y coordinates. And then I have another valley at 3, 0, which is already labeled. So increase is going up, decrease is going down, from left to right. Start at that -infinity, make your way to positive infinity. So if I start at -infinity and make my way to positive infinity, I'm going down, and I will keep going down until I hit that valley down at -3. So since I'm going down, it is decreasing from -infinity to -3. If I keep going, now I'm going up or increasing, starting at -3 all the way until I hit that peak at 0. So it is increasing from -3 to 0. Gotta keep going. Now I'm going back down, starting at 0 until we hit that valley at 3. Make sure you use the union symbol. So going down from 0 to 3. And then finally, gotta keep going. Now I'm going back up, starting at 3, all the way until infinity. So now let's look at positive and negative. Again, positive is above the x-axis, negative is below the x-axis. When you look at this graph, you might say, well, it never goes below the x-axis, so it's not negative, and that would actually be an accurate statement. So there is no negative interval because it never goes below the x-axis. However, that doesn't mean the entire thing is positive. Although almost the whole thing is positive, where it hits the x-axis, it's not above, it's on the x-axis, and that's not defined as positive because 0 is neutral. So there are going to be multiple positive intervals. So like always, we're going to start at negative infinity. We're above, we're above, we're above, we are above until we hit 3. So it's positive from negative infinity to negative 3. Keep going. Now we're back above, starting at negative 3. We're above, we're still above, we're still above, all the way until we hit 3. So from negative 3 to 3, it's above. And then I got to keep going. Now I'm above, and I'll always be above from 3 to infinity. So your positive interval is everything besides negative 3 and 3, because at negative 3 and 3, it's on the x-axis and not above the x-axis. For our last example, we're going to be looking at what's called an absolute value graph. It is very similar to a quadratic because it has that same sort of shape, except for this is a V instead of a U, but its properties are similar to that of a parabola. So again, let's start by labeling left arrow, negative infinity, right arrow, positive infinity, x-intercept at negative 3, 0, cross off that 0, x-intercept at 5, 0, cross off that 0, and there is a minimum down at 1, negative 8, cross off that negative 8. So increasing, going up from left to right, decreasing, going down from left to right, start at negative infinity, go to positive infinity. So if I start at negative infinity, I am going down and I will keep going down all the way until I hit that valley down at 1. So it is decreasing starting at negative infinity until 1. If I keep going, now I'm going up starting at that 1 for the rest of the graph, so all the way into infinity. So 1 to infinity. Positive is where it's above the graph. Negative is where it's below the, not the graph, above the x-axis for positive and below the x-axis for negative. Starting at negative infinity, going until positive infinity. So if I start at negative infinity, we are above the x-axis, and we will continue to be above the x-axis until we hit the x-intercept. So that is from negative infinity to negative 3. If we keep going, now we are below the x-axis starting at negative 3 until we get back to the x-axis at 5. So negative 3 until 5. Finally, if we keep going, starting at 5, for the rest of the graph, it will be above the x-axis. So 5 until infinity, making sure you use the unit.